Welcome to another episode of the Institute for Conflicts Individuation podcast. I am Dr. Lahab El Samurai. With me is Eric Tomlinson, and we are back to discuss the anima and the animus in chapter 6 of Jung's Map of the Soul by Dr. Murray Stein. Um, this This chapter is controversial on many levels, so we're going to make it even more so, just for fun. Okay, so why don't we get started? Eric, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I know the general popular kind of theory makes between the anima and the animus makes it controversial, but when you really study this chapter as well as um, other information that Jung spoke about, it really takes the controversy out of it, in my opinion. Um, Let me start off with the definition.
Okay.
Anima and animus are subjective personalities that reveal features of the soul and lead into the realm of the unconscious.
Okay.
That's his definition in Stein. And I thought that was a good general overview definition.
So let's add to it. He says the anima and the animus, strictly speaking, is a scientific hypothesis about something
Mm-hmm.
that exists. I think this is what you were alluding to, that exists but cannot be observed directly, like an unknown star whose position and size are known only from measurements of gravitational pulls in its vicinity. And yet, since the manifestations of anima and animus, as Jung noted, describe them, do in fact often resemble well-known cultural images embodied by traditional men and women, the question has been raised, was Jung a victim of his cultural blinders, who inadvertently became the exponent of cultural stereotypes? In other words, are the archetypes in fact social constructions? Or was Jung investigating deeper structures that perhaps are embedded in these cultural patterns, but transcend them and are indeed universal forms of human psychological traits and behaviors? I will not answer this question definitively in this chapter, but I hope to advance the case that the issue is more complicated and Jung's thinking is more complex than many of his critics have granted. In the meantime, I tried to present his thoughts as clearly as possible, which we will not pretend to do.
Right.
We are going to talk about Stein's thoughts. But
A couple of things that he said, if I may, Lahab.
yeah.
A couple of things that Stein said that really helped me, because what you just read, are these social constructs or are they some deeper universal form? And I like when he said that human sex, because all males have an anima and an animus. All females have an anima and an animus. So we both have both. However, there are slight variations within the male and female because of the anima and the animus both have their own predispositions. And he then went on to say that just because we project, here's the key, I think, for me, just because we project gender onto anima and animus doesn't mean that they aren't broader than that in structure. And I really like him saying that.
I'll take it. I'll take that
Okay.
as long as we're going to Vegas. I'll take that and I'll raise you.
Okay.
Remember in chapter, our listeners, in chapter 4, the psyche's boundaries, On page 101, he says, while it is true that the instincts and the archetypes belong together as correspondences, Jung clearly does not want to say that the archetypes can be reduced to instincts or instincts to archetypes. They are intimately related as correspondence, and they subsist side by side as reflection in our own minds of the opposition that underlies all psychic energy. And I think what we are talking about is that the underlying opposites of the energy. So let's think of anima and animus more as two different pools of energy that express themselves in a very different way from the other, but in a complementary way to the other.
Yes.
So they compensate for each other, they complement each other, and they work around each other
Mhm.
deep within the unconscious. And they relate to those pieces of the collective unconscious. And what has been lost through time is the over identification with the archetypes.
Mm.
That is the issue. The issue is the over identification with archetypal structures or energies that create social human patterns in our society that become very conflictual. As I think the young people say today, that gender is fluid and gender is non binary, which I agree with. It is
Yes.
non binary, and Jung would agree with that idea. I think what happened with Enema and Animus in Jung's thinking is it got caught up with the thinking of the day.
Yes.
And then um, it was reductionism of the theory, of the ideas. Not to say that Jung understood it completely. I think he missed the boat. I think he found a piece of gold and he looked at it, but there was a diamond inside. He did not see the diamond, and all the gold kind of covered it. And the diamond, that piece of it was that these yin yang energies that move around each other, complement each other, compensate for each other, express their um, their connection to the outside world in a very different way.
Well, Dr. Lahab, I think that's, I don't know where you got that from or how long it took you to pull all that together, but that's, I think, the best description I've ever heard of it.
Hmm.
Is what you just went through. And it goes deeper than what, in my opinion, what Jung was describing. Um, Stein hinted at it when he said human sexuality may be guided by the archetypal image,
Ooh.
but the image is not reducible to the drive.
Ooh.
And that's what you said when you were talking about how we've reduced it. We've engaged in reduction.
Yes.
But I thought
Yeah.
Stein hit it with that. And it
Yeah. And
supports what
the reduction of it to the drive um, is the rejection of the archetype. It's the rejection of the feminine instinct that is a rejection of the archetype, of the animus archetype,
is
of the yin yang archetype. That is the rejection of the core principle of the archetype, because the core principle of the archetype is these two energies exist as a complementary system of being in the universe. If we take the archetypes as maps, as genetic sequencing to our psychological awareness of the world and how we can function within the world and how we can expand our functioning in the world, then what we've done is we have chosen to only stare at one side of the archetype and refuse to stare at the other side of the archetype. That means missing the whole boat.
yes. The way I think of it, what you just said, and please correct me if I'm missing this a little bit here. because I do agree with you when you state that it is a reduction of the archetype. And what I think of it as is it's our projections upon the archetype that adds more meaning to it than we should.
Yeah. Well, the reduction is we reduce it to the instinct.
So we're saying the same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
We're basically reducing it to the instinct. We're not looking at the archetype as the overall structure of what is. And here in Stein, in this previous chapter goes, the psyche exists in a space between pure body and transcendent mind, between matter and spirit. And psychic process seems to be balances of energy flowing between spirit and instinct. The psyche is in between phenomena, and its process behaves like a scale along which consciousness slides. At one moment, it finds itself in the vicinity of the instincts and falls under its influence. At another, it slides along to the other end, where spirit predominates and even assimilates the instinctual process most opposed to it. There is a kind of internal shuttle between the instinctual pole and the spiritual archetypal pole of the psyche. Consciousness struggles in a regular panic against being swallowed up in the primitivity and unconsciousness of this sheer instinctuality on the one hand, but it also resists complete possession by spiritual forces, such as, or i.e., in other words, psychosis on the other. When coordinated, however, the archetypes provide form, meaning to the instinct, and the instinct provides raw physical energy to the archetypal images to assist them in realizing the spiritual goal towards which the whole nature of man strives. It is the sea to which all rivers wind their way, the prize which the hero wrests from the fight with the dragon. When we think of this archetype, and I am going to call it this archetype, I don't think they are separate archetypes. I think they coexist within the same structure. I think they are one archetype. I think the anima and the animus are not separated. I think they flow on poles in the archetype and they complement each other.
That is really, really interesting that you make that point. That clarifies a lot for me, Dr. Lahab. Thank you. Could you repeat that, please?
Yes. So I think if you exist in one archetype, that means that the two energies have the same power within the archetype. They just it depends on which pole of the archetype you're holding on to.
Poles. They're at yeah, they have different poles.
They have different poles. They move in different directions. Although they move around each other, although they dance. So human beings regularly dance together. We know this from the birds. The birds also dance together. We know this in the animal kingdom. Animals dance together. Think of the archetypal energy, because that's what the expression is. What they're expressing is the dance. It's the energetic movement in the archetype between that which we think of or understand as a feminine and the masculine. But it is a dance, and there is no, when we say feminine, masculine, we don't mean there's a power differential here. What we do mean is that they exist within the same energy. One can lead, the other can follow. One can follow, the other can lead. And it's not a stagnant structure.
Yeah, and the fact that they're predispositional in nature, which is what I believe, means that whatever we put onto them, whatever we project onto them, whatever our experiences gives us meaning of them, can vary greatly in every individual.
They're predispositional in nature when they are triggered. When they are not triggered, they are not.
That's a good addition. Thank you.
Yes, because we understand from Jung's theory that the complex arises because of the trauma. Because what happens to it is when the trauma hits that archetypal energy, a complex arises. And within that complex arises the issues of masculinity and femininity. But that's a trauma.
I was going to ask you a question to see if you could clarify a little bit for me.
Sure.
You already read the statement. It's anima and animus, whose deepest essence lies outside the psyche. And then he talks about impersonal spiritual forms and power. You already read that and talked about it briefly.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering when he says impersonal spiritual forms, I naturally think of what my first thought is what people normally think of as something that's spiritual, of the spiritual realm. And I was wondering if you could juxtapose that for me or clarify that for me, or
Well,
how is it spiritual?
it is the ecstasy of the connection. It is always in the ecstasy of the connection that is spiritual. Spirituality means I am connected. I've been touched. I've been held. I've heard the word. It is do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Does
Okay.
it, when it says it's outside of the realm of the psyche,
Well, that's the other part, right?
that throws me
But
a little.
when I am touched, the spiritual is when I am touched in that way. It's a higher form of consciousness.
Okay.
It sits outside my psyche because when I recognize it, the first instinct I have is to call it godlike. In Arabic, we call it ilah, hay ilah, hay rabbak, which means that's your God. That's your God. And, when you say something and say, I saw her and I knew she was the one for me. And your friend goes, oh, that's your God. God has shown you who you're supposed to see. This is the archetype.
I was wondering because I know some people may want to ask the question
Well,
that,
ask the question.
okay, and that is, okay, I kind of know where what the psyche is and where it kind of lives. I kind of know where the psychoid is and what it is. I understand, the persona now and where it is, but where exactly is the anima and the animus?
It's an archetype. So if the self is the archetype of order, there is all the archetypes are these star constellations. It's another star constellation. And the more you discover the star constellation, the more you're able to discover that which is more of your feminine self, as well as your masculine self, as well as that 9 binary in between space. For a long time throughout history, we have had several genders around us. There wasn't this clear delineation between male and female. There were all kinds of genders. That became more structurally when what happened is that the archetypal energies that we ran up against, those that we identified with, were that of the godlike realm, the archetypal father, the iron hand, that split sexuality in the middle. It is the father who splits sexuality in the middle, is the It's that energy. When there is way too much identification.
Mm. That's what you meant earlier when you said the over identification with the archetypes.
Correct. And we over identify with the archetypes all the time.
Yeah.
If I am a warrior, I over identify with the archetype. You know, if I'm a machinist, I over identify with the archetype. If I am a physicist, I over identify with the archetype. When I over identify with the archetype, I lose touch with the other archetypes. They become pillars on faraway shores that I cannot reach. Because my energy is connected and contained within a very small sphere. And that's why the more that we're possessed by the archetype, the less flexible we are.
Yes. Less open.
Yeah, because then we can't be moved by the other energies that exist in the map.
Boy, very well said.
So if we're born with this map of different archetypal energies that move us to dance, to play, to listen, to exalt, to do whatever we want to do. But then when we limit that, then we become over-identified. Hi, my name is so-and-so. I do so-and-so. Welcome, 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 welcome. Okay, bye. I become rigid, unable to even find my own depth because I lose depth. Because basically when we're over-identified, the archetype, the archetypal energies basically have us like puppets on a string. We're just being like manipulated by them.
Yes. Yeah, I've got a whole life of that.
Well, and that's not your fault. That's because of the trauma and the complex.
Yeah.
And that happens to all of us
Yeah.
because there are traumas and therefore complexes arise. If you're a little boy and you're picked on and you're bullied because you are not identified by the Godhead, by the archetype that pronounces the hammer, then you're traumatized and therefore the archetypal energy split. You become very, very tormented by them. So one side picks you up and the other side throws you off. One side picks you up and the other side throws you off. And that goes on. And there's a lot of the work that we do at the Institute for Conflict is to deal with the complexes in the form of jam, to heal these rifts, to help you get kind of like a quiet mind where the voices, the energies are not clamoring for control. We're basically, I mean, the traumas that occur to the male or female child, doesn't matter, it's a child. But then it gets redefined and redefined and redefined. So the traumatic event starts to kind of split, right? And we know that the archetypes are bipolar. So then there's splits in the archetypes. And so we have these splits where, and what I mean by that is like, you could be like macho man and feel like you are the toughest person, but you have all these kind of very feminine aspects to you that you are not aware of. that you would crush anybody who you saw do that in front of you. But they're part of you, but you don't see them. They're completely oblivious. So what happens is the archetypal energy split. And so you look kind of weird. On the one hand, you are, the toughest, meanest thing. And on the other hand, you're like, you hug everybody, you love everybody, everybody's great. Very odd. That's a split in the archetype. The split is a dissociation. That means the archetype. That means you have a complex. That means you've been traumatized. And we know this. It happens very early on. Don't act that way. Don't dress that way. Don't look that way. Don't. And this is how you traumatize. And then the archetype, and then you disassociate. So you get traumatized. You disassociate. The dissociation is what? A thunderbolt that hit the archetype. Because the archetype is supposed to protect you. So that's the job. So then the complex is put, and the complex is what? The complex is there to protect you, but at the same time, it's tyrannical system of oppression, because you can never get out of it. You might need it for a month or two, but it's there for life. It's a sentence. And I think it's like in all of Jung's work, so incredibly brilliant. At the same time, he split off from it because it's hard to comprehend.
Yes.
Right? That there's these patterns that we can't see, we can't hear. But now that, we have microscopes that show us that there are smaller things than bacteria and viruses that we've never seen that exist. Well, so there's a strange thing in this universe, is that there's a wave of energies that all are living organisms with something of a consciousness. So it's not that we have consciousnesses, that our consciousness is reverberating from all the other consciousness that comes until it hits our face.
We literally have billions of other living organisms in our body
Yeah.
that are separate and apart from
That's it. That's in our body. That's not what we're seeing outside of our body. We have also living on top of our body. We also don't see it in the space that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these things, these organisms, which I think are conscious, I think they are the vibrations of consciousness. I think everything is conscious. And therefore, all these connections make us more aware.
And without them, we wouldn't be able to stay alive.
But we don't even know until they know. They know way ahead of us what's going on. And I think when it comes to the archetypes, they know way ahead of us what's going on. So any concept that when we try to hold these archetypes and brand them and say, oh, you're the feminine, masculine energy, let me brand you so I can come check him. They refuse. They're like shapeshifters. They say, oh, really? But we have this in all of us. How do you explain it in the father complex? How do you explain it? And so, how do you explain these archetypes? And it's that unknowing, right? It's that outside of our consciousness is not there, is become our biggest Achilles heel. And ultimately, it will lead to our destruction.
I have one last question I'd like to ask you, Dr. Lahab, if it's that relates to this. I don't know if this is maybe we should save it for another podcast, but I'll at least bring it up and you tell me what you think. In trying to get, because what you said about the anima and animus being one single unit, its core is one single unit of energy, with different poles, but it's one center piece of energy that we all have. I think is one of the most important things that both males and females across the planet need to understand, to better understand what human sexuality and gender is all about.
Well, Freud said it, right? Freud was intuitive towards it. He said that we are all born bisexual. He said it. He said that both of those energies exist within us.
Yes.
Those energies do not exist separate.
Right. But here's my question. Here's what I'm having a hard time juxtaposing a little bit or intermeshing. And that is, and maybe it's because what I'm getting ready to say is really not a part of the anima or animus. And that is, biologically speaking, neurobiologically speaking, males and females, the brains have different structures. They have same structures, but they're put together differently, and it causes not many as we think, but it causes some differences. The most obvious is in our bodies. And so how do those subtle differences in feminine male form and female form, how does that, or does it relate to anima and animus? I think
that's biological.
Okay.
I think that's just my point of view.
My
point of view is that the physical bodies are biologically, evolutionarily moving in that direction. But the archetype itself, it's non-binary. It's neither. It will not hold on to either. It doesn't matter. I mean, because we've seen it with our own eyes.
So those two views are not in conflict with one another then?
No, not really. Actually, human evolution on this planet proves that the archetypes exist in very, very different ways, because the archetypes will plant their flag. They will show themselves in ways and say, well, this is how we like it over here. Welcome to wherever. And you go, but why do you like it this way? Well, man, this is how we grew up. Well, the archetypal energy is consolidated. It's there. So when you walk into a place or places, you are dealing with the archetypal energy. And the older the place is, the stronger the archetypal energy is, which causes a lot of problems. Because younger generations are sick and tired of the old archetypal structures. They want new ones. Those are oppressive for them.
Just like I wanted new ones when I was a teenager.
And that's how it's supposed to be. Because the way the universe is made is the archetypal energies renew themselves. And without renewal, we have decay and destruction. And we've seen that in places. We've seen people who have hold on. So the old folk tale or the old myth goes, those who have held on to their older gods have been wiped out, because new gods have arisen, right?
Those who hold on to their older gods. I like that.
Yeah, right? So who holds on to their older gods? Well, I believe in something nobody believes in anymore. Well, you're a fool because nobody believes in that anymore. Your older gods are gone. Get with it, buddy. Believe in the new gods. There's a great show for those who want to kind of think about the archetypal structures. It's called Gods in America, and it's about the old gods and the new gods going to war. The gods who came to America and the gods who rose in America. The new different type of energies, and they're at war. And people have to draw their lines. But these are archetypal energies. Change cannot come, we know this, without conflict. Change cannot come without the destruction of something so something else can rise. Change does not come because something that already exists grows. No, it doesn't. I mean, you could help it a little bit, but to really change something, something must completely implode so you could build. And without transformation, and without this form of transformation, without transformation being okay, we decay. We do, we decay. We sit and, what's the term? We get fat off the hog. We decay. We need the transformational energy. We need the change. We need the older structures to fall so new structures can rise. Now, the new structures can very much be pieces of the older structure. But
That's an important point.
But fundamentally,
Thank you.
Pieces of the older structure, they are not the older structure itself. Always remember, pieces are very different from the structure itself. Because we start to think that, oh, you mean this structure that, no, it means like if we destroy a bridge and we take it apart and it has, I don't know, 100,000 tons of metal. Well, that's important metal. We can melt that and recreate structures to put back into the bridge. But it doesn't have to be the old rickety bridge.
And yet it still contains pieces of the former.
Correct. But now there are structures like a rotted bridge that you can't save anything from.
Right.
Symbolically, it has had its time. Therefore, it needs to be changed.
And even then, you can still use some of it for fuel.
For sure, but not in the same way. So,
Right, of course.
So there are structures that we can take pieces of, and there are structures we cannot. They're rotten to the core. Get rid of them. Build a new one. But everything that is built is based on something that already exists in psyche. That's why everything that we fantasize about already exists because we've created it. We fantasized about it. As soon as we fantasize about it, it exists. If we say there are aliens on Mars, therefore there are aliens on Mars. We've already known this. It didn't come out of nowhere. There are Martians, there must be Martians. And someday we will prove it. Like we proved we could get to the moon. Like we proved we could go into space. Like we proved that we could build a space station. All these things were fantasy not that long ago, not that many years ago, actually.
The Martians may be in very, very different form than us,
It
though.
doesn't matter. I agree. It doesn't matter. We might not be able to see them.
Yeah.
They might be in an advanced form. They might be in an advanced state. We're still holding on to our biological sense.
Hmm.
We can't exist outside of our primitive bodies. That will change over time. We will be able to exist without our primitive shape. We were eating shit and cleaning shit and eating with the same hand. We've changed that. We wash our hands now. We've advanced, but we are still in a very biological body. We haven't had the sense to, but we know because we've dreamt it, we've created it, that we can see it. We could see somebody kind of having their consciousness being moved. We could see that. It's a possibility. It used to be science fiction.
And yet we can get grossed out over how other cultures of people react to the primitive nature of our biological bodies.
We are primitive. In the sense we are very animalistic in nature. This organism is primitive. And so you have two sets of things going on. You have a being, an organism that's primitive. It still enjoys some very, very basic kind of nasty things like all animals do. But on the other hand, it could sit there and philosophize about the need to save humanity as a whole. So it has this miraculous, beautiful psychic ability to see the world in a very different way, but it's still, behind closed doors, it's an animal.
Yeah.
It sniffs its underwear. It's like, oh, you haven't smelled yourself? You really need to sniff it. It sniffs your socks. I mean, this shit that everybody does. It's like, okay, why do we do that? Well, this is because we're animal in nature.
There are cultures all over the planet, even today, that use shit as a fuel to cook their food over.
Well, this is the secondary. I mean, I'm just talking about us in the first world. I'm talking about us who sit in the ivory towers.
Well, but most Americans would find what I just said repulsive.
Well, yes, but in privacy, they know you're right. They might, in front of friends, they might sit there and say, what the fuck are these guys talking about? But behind closed doors, they go, yeah, especially when they're sniffing their finger. They're like, I guess these guys are right. Okay, this is how it is. These are facts about this. So when we talk about the archetypes, what we're talking about is the ability to psychologically see yourself more than just a functioning nose, eyes, ears, uh, sexual parts, whatever you think you are. But as somebody who is connected to the rest of humanity, as a piece of humanity, as something that's not separate from humanity, as something that feeds the rest of humanity. We are, every creation we've created came in form of what? Imagination. Where the hell did it come from? That's the archetype. Where did the archetype come from? Evolution, grand design, the creator, the universe, aliens. It doesn't matter. Because all of them do the same thing, which is that our ability to see beyond ourselves has always been there. So the question is, how do we know? How do I know I could go to the moon? I'm a caveman. How do the fuck do I know how to go to moon? I just invented toilet paper. Am I ready to go to moon? I don't know. How do I go to moon? I go to moon. Now I go to Mars. And there are exoplanets far, far away and galaxies far, far away from us that people might reach God knows in how many light years. We're talking about putting people in stasis. Well, we've been talking about that. It's been science fiction. It's no longer science fiction. We know that.
Yeah.
We know what. Why do we know about stasis? Because viruses that've been frozen for hundreds of millions of years melt and they're alive. And they're good to go. So we know that it's possible. We have always known that's possible. All these things we know is possible. We know that our worst nightmares are possible. Why? Because we created them. We know that we have blundered. Yeah. How do we know that? We created it. Is there a grand design? Of course, there's a design. It's called the cosmos. The cosmos has a design. And it unfolds. People can argue about this planet any which way. They could say that the diversity of creatures on this planet don't look like they came from the same place. Or just evolution just kind of like took a giant volcanic explosion all over this planet. And it never happened in any other planet and so. That's ridiculous. We know this is ridiculous because we like to tell ridiculous stories. We have always done that. I don't know, Eric. Maybe I kind of went off subject, but I think this is what we talk about when we're talking about the archetype.
Well, I don't think it's off subject at all because it still gets back to that early original form of energy that has created life in the first place. It's all the same.
So you're thinking in the same direction I'm thinking.
Very much so. Very much so.
That the energy is conscious. The energy itself is conscious. It's pure consciousness. And it wants to be more conscious. It wants to see with many different eyes and ears. What do we want to do? We want to see with many eyes and ears. We have telephones, we have video cameras, we have computers, we have televisions, we have glasses, we have telescopes, we have hearing aids, we have listening devices, we have satellites. Where does that come from? That comes from the same place.
Yeah.
That need to hear, to know, to listen, to grow, that is pure consciousness. That's pure energy.
And what's ironic to me and what boggles my mind is that, and you refer to this a lot. I'm just going to put a scientific term to it, and you refer to this energy that you've been talking about and that I've discussed with you, and then you also talk about that's just what we can see or perceive.
Oh, for sure.
And yet scientists now believe that the energy that we can perceive on all levels is only makes up about 10 to 20% of the universe.
Correct.
Where's all this other energy? I mean, what is it doing?
It's called dark matter, and we don't understand
dark
it.
Energy. Yeah.
We don't understand it. We don't know what the hell it is.
Yeah.
The only reason we call it dark is because we can't see it. We can't turn on the light. Because the sense of That there is energy that is light and that is dark, maybe, but we can't see it. And I think when we think about different living organisms that we might not understand beyond our understanding, because we're animals, a little sophisticated. I mean, we can like pick up the hint of pine or whatever you're drinking, which wine, or the cinnamon and the wine, whatever the fuck it is. But we are animals. We're primitives. We don't really see ourselves differently than that. Until we are able to start seeing the world in a very different way, we cannot imagine what you're talking about, which is seeing that which is not seen. It's dark because we can't see it. And not see it with our eyes, Eric. We can't see it with our imagination. When we start to see it with our imagination, then everything changes. I think this is creation.
Okay. Your picture was froze for a few seconds, but
You
you're
were
back.
froze too, so I was staring back at you, but you look good frozen. But these are the
One of
things
the things
that we don't see, Eric, because our imagination
Yeah.
can't see. What is it that you can't see? I have to explain something to you. I explain to you a concept, and you go, I don't see it. Basically, what you're saying to me is, my imagination can't see it. Help my imagination see. This is about
that's exactly.
imagination.
Can you hear me, Dr. Lahab?
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yeah, that's it makes me think of one of my favorite astrophysicists, Dr. Vera Rubin,
Mm,
female, and
mm,
back 40 years ago, she had the kind of imagination you're talking about,
mm,
and but they wouldn't let her work on black holes because she was a woman.
mm,
They said, here, you have to study just our solar system in our galaxy only.
mm,
You let it leave the black holes to us.
mm,
So what did she do?
mm,
She devoted herself to what they gave her, and she discovered dark matter.
mm. Exactly. Because her imagination, what they were trying to limit,
That's right.
she could already see. What they were afraid of, she can already see. What they couldn't explain, she already saw. And that's what you fear most. That's what you fear most. I mean, it's like, okay, so this person sees something I don't see. That means I am archaic. Hint, hint, archetypal. Hint, hint. The great messenger who writes all the notes in the sky gives you answers to things. Who is this great messenger? Nobody knows.
Then they finally let female astrophysicists work on things like black holes. And Dr. Andrea Getz spent 8 years, and she and her team discovered a supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy.
Mm.
So it just goes to show you, well, a lot of things on that point. Number one, the main point that you're saying. And then number two, don't dismiss somebody because of their age, gender, whatever. You can't dismiss anyone.
Well, it's a limit of imagination, brother, that you look at their physical features and you decide you know what they think. Because basically what you are saying is that there is a bubble and there is certain information in that bubble, and that bubble exists in your head. That's insane. That's out of a comic book. There is no way to know who you sit in front of and what they are going to tell you, and what they say is not going to blow you away.
Yes.
Every time I see somebody and they say something and I hear it and I'm like, wow, I don't think they heard what they said. I heard what they said. Did they hear what they said? Because when you open up your imagination to possibility, anything can happen. When you're shut down, nothing can. Because basically what you've done is created this fictional house with this small cubby hole as a door. And you like pull in information through there, everything exists outside doesn't exist. The possibilities are endless. The things that are happening in this universe are endless.
And that's why, to bring it full circle, everything you've been talking about, everything we've been talking about comes right back full circle to we have to have that same kind of imagination with the anima and the animus, and not just
Correct.
do it as gender related.
Correct. It is to see the energy of creation.
Yes.
The anima and the animus stand for energy of creation. That is the archetype of creation. And I will repeat that. This is not something that Jung says, but I will say that archetype is the archetype of creation. The anima and the animus exist as the archetype of creation. They are the spark that started Adam and Eve on their way. They are the ones who lit the ground, scientifically speaking, and had the first organism spurt out of the water and die on the shore.
I really like that. I can see that.
It
When,
is, it
when
is the
did you come up?
spark. It's the
When did you
spark.
come up? When did you come up with that?
Well, just now because it's a spark.
Oh,
It
well,
is
that's
a
very good.
spark. It's a spark of creation. It's within these energies we create. The masculine, feminine aspect of it is instinctual. That's the external dance. There's an internal dance that keeps them together, that keeps them fruitful and multiplying, that keeps them moving across time.
Mm-hmm.
Our freaking population is almost what, 8 billion or 9 billion, something ridiculous. We have never been this big on this planet. We have not existed in these numbers on this planet. If any of the archetypes have existed and have made it through these two archetypes, this archetype itself, and sometimes we think of them as two archetypes, they're not. This archetype itself is that spark. What are your thoughts, brother?
I'm just thinking about this point you brought up, and it's making a lot of sense to me. And it also spun me off into thinking when you talked about the population of this planet, archetypes are going to, as a result of this, because this has never existed on this planet before, this population density, there there's going to be some significant changes in a variety of archetypes over the next couple hundred years.
We already have. We have war. We have the archetype of death. We have an archetype right now, this pandemic. There is a war. There is an archetype of death. Archetypes arise because we are in need of them. The cosmos sends them to us because we are in need of them. We don't understand our ability to communicate. See, this is the problem, right? Okay. For example, you say Einstein sat there and he figured all the shit out. How the fuck did he figure that shit out? Because we don't understand our psychic connection. We don't understand our psychic antenna. We don't understand our connection to the archetypes. We refer to the archetype as having nuclear core. Where the fuck does that come from? Why are we referring to the archetype as having a nuclear core? Because it's self-generating energy. It does not die because we know. What do we know? First law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed.
Those kinds of minds even learn from their dreams, as you very well know.
It is not because they saw it out here or read it in a book.
Right.
That's the thing, Eric. That's the thing. It's not these minds. They're our minds. They are physically human as we are. They are open
Open, yes.
to the archetypal energy in a way. And they're tuned in. Somebody's tuned them in.
Well, the scientist who discovered the benzene ring saw it in a dream as little animals dancing around, and it's a foundation to chemistry because he was open to his dreams. Most people think their dreams are nonsense.
The airport in Rome is Leonardo da Vinci Airport. Da Vinci dreamt of things and drew them, and they came to life. Apples fall from the sky, and people think, oh, this is gravity. How many heads have apples fallen on, man? Imagine. But one hand goes, oh, that's gravity. Interesting. I always like to say interesting because it's always interesting as to how these sparks light up across humanity like flickering lights.
Seemingly out of nowhere.
Seemingly out of nowhere,
Yeah.
seemingly uninspired, seemingly average,
Yeah.
Sitting in a garage, tooling around. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I mean, if it wasn't for the, there was a huge Catholic purge of all kinds of scientists and intellectuals, and
Horrible.
we have delayed our advancement over and over again because other people had ideas about certain things.
Some were put to death.
For sure, yeah. Some suffered because of what they knew. Well, the devil must have given it to you because it didn't exist. No, it exists. And I think as we become more and more conscious of ourselves and our fellow sisters and brothers, and the more peaceful we become towards each other, and the more caring and loving we become towards each other and taking care of each other, because the resources are mass and we can't take care of these people. We will continue to destroy ourselves if we don't. We have to move to a different state. We have figured out ways of annihilating each other. Biological weapons, nuclear weapons, all kinds of weapons, radiological weapons. Shit, we could blow up an entire city without a nuclear weapon now.
Yes.
But the question is why? Why do we continue? We infect each other with viruses, we attack each other. This is just keeping us from our utmost potential. Our potential on this planet is vast if we understand what it is. First, we have to save planet. We have to start treating planet as a living, breathing being. And we have to respect it. We have to teach children how to respect it. We have to teach, because once we are able to teach people to respect planet, then we have to respect each other, because we are citizens born of this planet. We're no longer black, brown, white, Asian, whatever. We are citizens of this planet because we're caretakers. That's what we are. Unless these energies understand how to live together, unless these energies are able to start to speak to each other in a more equitable way, respectful way, they will destroy each other and destroy the planet that they live on. That seems to be a remarkably regenerative no matter what we do. Except if we blow it into pieces. But if we leave this rock barren, the rock will come back. We have seen that. It's incredibly resistant to our shit. And that's why when I look at pictures from Chernobyl, I'm blown away. I smile because what it says is Mother Nature is smarter than you are, dumbass. Oh, by the way, you can't come back, but the little animals come back. With that, I am Dr. Lahab Al Samurai. I know we got off on a tangent. We started to talk about the anima and the animus and Jung's theory of the archetypal energies that shape our ideas of feminine and masculine. Um, the presupposition that I made today was that these energies, uh, this archetype, has been traumatized, and therefore the complex is the one that causes these rifts among us that are actually not needed for a lot of things, almost everything. I don't know. That's my idea. Dr. Tomlinson, would you like to say something before we head
No,
off into?
I'm glad that we digressed to the global understanding of energy,
Mm,
because without it, um, trying to pigeonhole something like, which humans like to do, pigeonhole something like the anima and the animus into a certain narrow pinpoint of energy is just inappropriate, and it's going to cause us to have a horrible misunderstanding of what this energy is. And I think it helped to put it into an overall perspective that shows its global dimensions and not just its individual dimensions.
Thank you, Dr. Tomlinson. So I am Dr. Lahab Al Samurai. This is the IFC's Individuation Podcast. Next week, we will be covering the psyche's transcendent center and wholeness, the self. So the self is considered by Jung as the archetype of order. Um, we will explore that to see what that means and how we can comprehend the self. What does it mean to be the archetype of order? What does it mean to be the center? What does it mean to be whole? With that, I bid you farewell and have a safe week. We will see you next week. And thank you so much for your time.
Peace.